The interpretation of the 2-hour survivability requirement for fire alarm cables in high-rise buildings differs among jurisdictions. Some cities permit sprinkler systems with overhead heads to fulfill this requirement, while others do not. Cities such as Boston, Chicago, New York City, and Philadelphia may deem sprinkler systems with overhead heads as providing adequate protection against fire damage to fire alarm cables for at least 2 hours, thus meeting the survivability requirement. Conversely, cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle might not consider sprinkler systems with overhead heads alone sufficient to satisfy the 2-hour survivability requirement for fire alarm cables. In such cases, supplementary measures such as fire-resistant coatings, enclosures, or concealed routing could be mandated. The varied interpretations arise from differences in local building codes, fire safety regulations, and risk assessments. Some jurisdictions view sprinkler systems with overhead heads as a dependable means of safeguarding fire alarm cables from fire, while others place greater emphasis on the necessity for additional physical protection. Several factors can influence the interpretation of the 2-hour survivability requirement. Firstly, building height. The 2-hour survivability requirement typically applies to buildings exceeding a specific height, which differs by jurisdiction. Secondly, occupancy type. The type of building occupancy, such as residential, commercial, or institutional, can also impact the interpretation of the requirement. Thirdly, a fire safety engineer's assessment. In certain instances, a fire safety engineer may be consulted to evaluate the risk and ascertain whether sprinkler systems alone are sufficient for the specific building. Consulting local building codes and authorities is crucial to determine the specific requirements for fire alarm cable survivability in high-rise buildings. Jurisdictions hold diverse interpretations, and adherence to local regulations is paramount to ensure the safety and functionality of fire alarm systems in the event of a fire. To further elaborate, when evaluating the suitability of sprinkler systems for fire alarm cable protection, it is essential to understand the specific performance standards and testing protocols that these systems must meet. These standards are designed to ensure that the sprinkler system can effectively suppress or control a fire long enough to allow occupants to evacuate safely and to protect critical infrastructure, including fire alarm cables. The National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA, provides comprehensive guidelines for the design, installation, and maintenance of sprinkler systems. NFPA 13, the standard for the installation of sprinkler systems, outlines the requirements for various types of sprinkler systems, including those used in high-rise buildings. This standard addresses factors such as sprinkler head spacing, water supply requirements, and system monitoring. In jurisdictions where sprinkler systems are accepted as a means of providing 2-hour fire resistance rated protection for fire alarm cables, it is crucial to verify that the system complies with NFPA 13 and any additional local requirements. This may involve submitting detailed system plans for review and approval by the local fire marshal or building official. Furthermore, the effectiveness of a sprinkler system in protecting fire alarm cables depends on several factors, including the type of sprinkler heads used, the water density delivered by the system, and the location of the sprinkler heads relative to the cables. Some sprinkler systems are designed to provide a higher level of protection than others, and it is important to select a system that is appropriate for the specific fire hazards present in the building. In addition to sprinkler systems, there are other methods that can be used to provide 2-hour fire resistance rated protection for fire alarm cables. These methods include encasing the cables in fire-resistant materials such as concrete or gypsum board, and using specially designed fire-resistant cables. Fire-resistant cables are typically constructed with a combination of materials that are designed to withstand high temperatures and prevent the spread of fire. These cables are often used in critical applications such as emergency lighting and fire alarm systems, where it is essential to maintain circuit integrity during a fire. When selecting a method for providing fire protection for fire alarm cables, it is important to consider the cost, installation requirements, and maintenance requirements of each option. Sprinkler systems can be relatively expensive to install and maintain, but they provide a high level of protection and can also help to protect the building components from fire damage. Fire-resistant cables are typically more expensive than standard cables, but they can be easier to install and require less maintenance. In some cases, a combination of methods may be used to provide the required level of fire protection. For example, fire alarm cables may be encased in fire-resistant materials in certain areas of the building, while sprinkler systems are used to protect the cables in other areas. Ultimately, the decision of which method to use will depend on the specific requirements of the local building codes and the overall fire safety strategy for the building. It's also important to consider the potential for future changes in building codes and regulations. Fire safety standards are constantly evolving as new technologies and best practices emerge. It's possible that the requirements for fire alarm cable protection could become more stringent in the future, which could necessitate upgrades to existing systems. Therefore, it's prudent to choose a fire protection method that is flexible and can be easily adapted to meet future requirements. This may involve selecting a system that is designed to be easily upgraded or that can accommodate additional fire protection measures. In addition to complying with building codes and regulations, it's also important to consider the impact of fire protection measures on the overall performance and reliability of the fire alarm system. Fire alarm systems are designed to detect fires early and alert occupants to evacuate. Any fire protection measures that could compromise the ability of the system to perform these functions should be carefully evaluated. For example, encasing fire alarm cables in fire-resistant materials could make it more difficult to access the cables for maintenance and repairs. This could lead to delays in restoring the system to service after a fire or other incident. Similarly, using fire-resistant cables that are not compatible with the fire alarm system could result in false alarms or other malfunctions. Therefore, it's essential to select fire protection measures that are compatible with the fire alarm system and that will not compromise its performance or reliability. To ensure that fire protection measures are properly implemented and maintained, it's important to involve qualified professionals in the design, installation, and maintenance of fire alarm systems and related fire protection systems. Fire alarm system designers and installers should be familiar with the latest building codes and regulations and should have experience in selecting and installing fire protection measures that are appropriate for the specific application. Fire alarm system inspectors and maintenance personnel should be trained to identify potential problems with fire protection measures and to perform necessary repairs or replacements. Regular inspections and maintenance of fire alarm systems and fire protection systems are essential to ensure that they are functioning properly and that they will provide the intended level of protection in the event of a fire. These inspections should be conducted in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations and applicable codes and standards. In addition to regular inspections and maintenance, it's also important to conduct periodic testing of fire alarm systems and fire protection systems to verify that they are operating correctly. Fire alarm system testing should include testing of all initiating devices, such as smoke detectors and heat detectors, as well as testing of all notification appliances, such as horns and strobes. Fire protection system testing should include testing of sprinkler systems, fire pumps, and other related equipment. The results of all inspections, maintenance, and testing should be documented and kept on file for future reference. This documentation can be used to track the performance of fire alarm systems and fire protection systems over time and to identify any potential problems that need to be addressed. Furthermore, it is important to educate building occupants about fire safety and the importance of fire alarm systems and fire protection systems. Building occupants should be familiar with the building's fire evacuation plan and should know how to respond in the event of a fire. They should also be aware of the location of fire alarm pull stations and fire extinguishers. Regular fire drills can help to reinforce these concepts and to ensure that building occupants are prepared to respond effectively in the event of a fire. In summary, ensuring the 2-hour survivability of fire alarm cables in high-rise buildings requires a comprehensive approach that includes careful consideration of local building codes and regulations, the selection of appropriate fire protection measures, the involvement of qualified professionals, and regular inspections, maintenance, and testing. By following these guidelines, it is possible to provide a high level of fire protection for fire alarm cables and to help ensure the safety of building occupants in the event of a fire. In some jurisdictions, the use of listed and approved fire-rated cable is mandatory for fire alarm circuits. These cables are specifically designed and tested to maintain their circuit integrity for a specified period, typically 2 hours, under fire conditions. The listing and approval process ensures that the cables meet certain performance standards and are suitable for use in fire alarm systems. When using fire-rated cable, it is important to follow the manufacturer's instructions for installation and termination. Improper installation or termination can compromise the cable's fire resistance rating. Additionally, it is important to protect the cable from physical damage during installation and throughout its service life. Damage to the cable can also compromise its fire resistance rating. Another consideration is the routing of fire alarm cables. In some jurisdictions, cables must be routed through areas that are protected by fire resistance rated construction. This can help to prevent the spread of fire to the cables and ensure that they can continue to function during a fire. When routing fire alarm cables, it is important to avoid areas where they could be exposed to high temperatures or physical damage. For example, cables should not be routed near heat sources or in areas where they could be struck by falling debris. It is also important to ensure that the cables are properly supported and secured to prevent them from sagging or becoming entangled. In addition to fire-rated cable and protected routing, other fire protection measures that can be used to enhance the survivability of fire alarm cables include the use of fire-resistant cable trays and conduits. Fire-resistant cable trays and conduits are designed to protect cables from fire and physical damage. They can also help to contain a fire and prevent it from spreading to other areas of the building. When using fire-resistant cable trays and conduits, it is important to ensure that they are properly installed and sealed to prevent the entry of smoke and fire. The selection of appropriate fire protection measures for fire alarm cables should be based on a thorough fire risk assessment of the building. This assessment should consider the building's occupancy, construction, and fire hazards. The results of the fire risk assessment can be used to determine the level of fire protection that is required for fire alarm cables and to select the most appropriate fire protection measures. It's also important to coordinate fire protection measures for fire alarm cables with other fire protection systems in the building, such as sprinkler systems and fire suppression systems. This coordination can help to ensure that all fire protection systems work together effectively to protect the building and its occupants. In addition to the technical aspects of fire protection for fire alarm cables, it is also important to consider the human factors. Building occupants should be trained on how to use the fire alarm system and what to do in the event of a fire. They should also be familiar with the building's fire evacuation plan. Regular fire drills can help to reinforce these concepts and to ensure that building occupants are prepared to respond effectively in the event of a fire. In conclusion, ensuring the 2-hour survivability of fire alarm cables in high-rise buildings requires a multifaceted approach that includes careful consideration of local building codes and regulations, the selection of appropriate fire protection measures, the involvement of qualified professionals, and regular inspections, maintenance, and testing. By following these guidelines, it is possible to provide a high level of fire protection for fire alarm cables and to help ensure the safety of building occupants in the event of fire.